The Yamaha NS-800 versus the 2000, bookshelf versus tower. That's what we're going to be talking about in today's video. Hey folks, I'm Gene DellaSala with Audioholics. We've got James Larson in the house. How you doing, James?
I'm good.
So I wanted to do this little comparison. I know it's not a fair comparison to compare a bookshelf to a tower speaker in the same series, of course, but it's an interesting one because you've got two speakers from the NS line from Yamaha, the NS-800A bookshelf and the NS-2000A tower. We just released the written report and Shane Lee's review of the 2000 tower. You're about to release the 800 bookshelf. And I said, James, let's do a video comparison of these two, and let's throw in a curve on this. Let's talk about two-way versus three-way designs, because not only is it a bookshelf versus a tower, but it's also a different driver topology. So we're dealing with a speaker that just has two drivers to do the entire bandwidth versus a speaker that has multiple drivers in a three-way crossover. So I thought it'd be interesting for you to put together this comparison, maybe talk a little bit about your listening results as well. And before we get started, guys, don't forget we have a contest right now going on. A pair of NS-800s Yamaha is sponsoring. They're giving these away. Enter to win if you're in the United States before January 31st, and good luck on that. So James, I'm going to throw on this little slide presentation that you created, and let's get to it.
Sure. Yeah, I thought it'd be kind of cool since we have both speakers in house to look at how the I guess the designs affect things. Like what are the trade-offs in a two-way versus three-way? And I think in one respect at least, these two speakers illustrate that nicely.
Right.
And then we have them both. I did a comparison, so yeah, this is a good time to do that. So a three-way speaker, is a three-way speaker better than a two-way? This is kind of a debate audiophiles have had for eons, right? Basically, right? Yep. As a refresher, the ways in like a two-way or a three-way speaker is the number of divisions of the frequency band for each set of driver. Example, a two-way speaker divides the frequency spectrum into two, with the woofer handling the lower frequencies and the tweeter handling the higher frequencies. With a three-way, the speaker handles the higher frequencies, but you've got a mid-range driver that handles the mid-range frequencies and a bass driver that just handles bass. So you could have a four-way speaker, five-way speaker. Those are not very common, but you can have more ways or more divisions of drivers. Just as a refresher for those who might not know, what we're
and just to be clear too, a two-way design doesn't necessarily mean you just have two drivers. You can have an MTM which has two drivers, two mid bass drivers, and one tweeter, and the tweeter sandwiched in between them. In fact, we did a video, Shane, Rich from RBH, and myself. I'll put it in the cards. In this particular case, we have two speakers in the same series, so it's an interesting comparison to talk about.
So the theoretical advantages of a three-way design, since each driver has a narrower bandwidth, they can be more focused on performing within that spectrum better and then if the driver has to deal with a wider spectrum. A tweeter, if it doesn't have to deal with mids, like a lot of tweeters, they try to deal with mids and highs. Well, if a tweeter just has to deal with just highs, like say at 3000 hertz and above, it can do that range much better than if it has to worry about a lower bandwidth, And if a bass driver doesn't have to worry about doing mids and it just has to worry about just doing deep bass, it can do that way better than if it's spread out more. Although there are exceptions for all these. These are kind of generalizations, and there's always exceptions. So, and that's that's just the way it is. But on another advantage of a three-way design can have is distortion can be lower, because because if a driver doesn't have to worry about playing such a deep frequency, it's those deep frequencies and the high excursions that stress a driver out, and that it can cause a driver to self-destruct even. So if you don't have to cross a driver as low and a frequency, then it just doesn't get stressed. It can handle way more power, and it can it just gets louder with less distortion.
You typically get more sensitivity as you add more drivers too.
Yeah,
you increase sensitivity. Yeah.
Another advantage is and this is a little technical, by reducing bandwidth for each driver, intermodulation distortion can be reduced since the wider bandwidths raise intermodulation distortion. This is a little, intermodulation distortion is a little technical, and I don't want to dig too much into that.
Yeah.
But I guess to put it simply, it's when signals within like the same channel interfere with each other and they cause like distortion products. And like if you have a lower bandwidth, then less signals are able to interfere with each other, and they produce less distortion products. And so like by dividing these by making drivers deal with narrower bandwidths, they can't raise intermodulation distortion as high for a narrower bandwidth. So that's,
they also don't operate in their breakup mode as much either.
oh yes, yeah, you can like, yeah, you can restrict you can have the drivers play better within their like
right within their linear range, basically.
Yeah, where they're more comfortable in a more linear range.
Yeah.
Also, another advantage of a three-way driver is directivity matching between drivers can be easier to achieve in a three-way design. So like let's say, for example, I mean, this is a good example. This is the NS-800 behind me, and that has a 1 1/4 inch dome tweeter, and that crosses over to a 6.5 inch woofer. This is very common loud bookshelf speaker design. Well, the problem with it is that you can't really ever get perfect directivity matching with a 6.5 inch woofer with a dome tweeter, a 1 inch dome tweeter, essentially, which is what this is. It can't really happen unless maybe you put a waveguide or a horn on the tweeter, right? And that has its own set of compromises. So like but when you have a mid-range, like what you have over here, you can get like perfect directivity matching, because you can have this, you can cross this like 3.5 inch dome mid-range much higher in frequency, and it can achieve perfect directivity matching with a 1 inch dome tweeter theoretically. So that's and the lead server is a good example of that. So those are the advantages of a three-way design. There's way more to it. This is a very brief overview.
Yeah.
We don't want to go too much in the weeds on this, but yeah. So you can go.
Well, I did a long YouTube discussion with Shane Rich from RBH Sound on two-way versus three-way speakers, and I will put it in the card so you guys can reference it below. But it was an interesting tape because in his case, RBH does MTM, so they do two drivers for the mid-range frequencies, and in some aspects, there's an advantage to doing that over a three-way with a smaller mid-range because you don't get as much sensitivity in the speaker. So there's definitely good arguments for both, and I encourage you guys to take a look at that video. But moving on here, let's talk a little bit about what a crossover looks like in a two-way versus a three-way. It's particularly in the Yamaha's case as well.
Sure. Well, okay, going on to the theoretical advantages of a two-way design. Most crossover circuits cause phase distortion. So like so by introducing more filters, we'll have more time domain errors. And the audibility of this is a matter of debate, right? In my experience, I don't think I've heard anything. It's never bothered me, right? And like, as long as the crossover circuit is done well at the filters, right? I haven't had any problems with it, right? But I guess some people think they can hear it, right? I don't know, maybe they can. And some research, it can be shown in like a laboratory setting, you can hear certain things like and time domain errors that are caused by filters. But I think this is very laboratory setting type stuff. In normal hearing, I don't know. That it's a matter of debate. But that is one of the theoretical disadvantages. You do technically get time domain errors by putting filters on signals. So that's one thing. And the more
passive filters.
Also a lot of active filters too. The only ones that might be exempt for this is FIR filters, right?
Right.
But IR filters would have the same problems. So like,
yeah.
But even FIR filters wouldn't be perfect, not perfect, but yeah. But anyways, the more filters we have, the more opportunities there are for mistakes. So like,
yeah.
So like, So like, if you have so many elements, then like there's just a better chance something could go wrong or something's not quite right.
This isn't the crossover for the Yamaha, is it? This is just generic?
No, the one on the left is the one for the NS-800. But the one on the right, I don't have an image for the one for the NS-2000. And so I just picked up a one I thought would suit our kind of discussion better. That's actually,
you're just illustrating two-way versus three-way here. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a pretty good one. That's a relatively simple three-way. On the right is a three-way crossover circuit, right? And that's a relatively simple and elegant one. It's like nicely laid out. There's not a whole lot of elements. They can get way more complicated than that. If you've seen the crossover circuits for, like, say, the Pro Listen speakers or the Arundel 1528s, right? They're just massive with lots of elements, right? So this is a very simple one. It's a very well done one too. And so, like, these are examples of those. But the theoretical advantages we just discussed are just for, like, like a generic two-way versus three-way. But now, for this particular comparison, we have particular speakers here, the NS-800A versus the NS-2000A. And, like, there's a lot of similarities. They're using the same tweeter, they're using the same bass drivers, but the like, as we said before, the 2000 has this mid-range, this 3 1/4 mid-range, which takes care of all the mid-range frequencies, and the woofer doesn't have to deal with it, and the tweeter doesn't have to deal with it. But what's interesting about this and what makes this a good comparison is the crossover frequencies. If you can see those crossover frequencies, the NS-800A uses a 2.6 kilohertz crossover frequency between the tweeter and the woofer, right?
Yeah.
But look at the NS-2000A's crossover frequencies. It's actually quite different. 3.5K, 750 hertz and 3.5K. These are relatively high crossover frequencies for a three-way speaker, and that has a really big advantage. It takes a real load off the tweeter. That's a high crossover frequency for a tweeter. So the tweeter, it's relieved of the burden of trying to play mid-range almost at all, right? And like, so, like, that means the tweeter can probably play louder in the NS-2000A than the NS-800A. Probably has a much wider dynamic range for that reason, And yeah, so that's one of the advantages of a three-way. I think these speakers kind of nicely exemplify. I guess we can skip ahead. That's kind of the point I wanted to make those. So yeah, so I did a listening test between these. And, like, there they are, obviously right behind me as well. And so you can go to the next slide. Yeah, obviously the 2000 and the NS-800. So here's just some testing. So, like, this isn't a really great comparison because these speakers have different tonalities, like somewhat different tonal differences. But I did it anyway because I thought, what the heck, right?
Yeah,
so,
I
like,
can see they look different in the mids area too.
Yeah, so that one, you can see it's a pretty flat frequency response up until we get to the very high treble where there is a spike, right? That spike is so high in frequency that it's not really that audible. You can't, we wouldn't hear that. Nobody would hear that, and there's not much content that high, right? That's just kind of a quirk of that tweeter. I think Yamaha kind of did that deliberately, right? It's so high, it shouldn't be paid attention to. But what should be paid attention to is everything beneath it. So there you have the frequency response of on that slide is the NS-800, which is the bookshelf speaker, and it's pretty flat. It's pretty good. It's pretty linear,
very linear,
on the on-affix response. And but if you go to the next one, that's the NS-2000's frequency response. You can see, well, the mid-range driver is a little recessed, right, relative to the bass driver and the tweeter. It's like it's a little bit scooped out mid-range, just a little bit, right? And so it's a bit more scooped out on axis, but if you go off axis, it flattens out a bit more. And so this speaker, like the NS-800, I would say listen to this, having it facing directly the NS-800As. But this one, since it's like a bit more, the tweeter is a little bit more, I guess, like lower energy off axis. Have these facing outward straight, right? That tones down the tweeter a bit, and it makes it a more balanced speaker. But anyways,
so face the 2000 straight forward in most cases, and then the 800 you can experiment more with toe-in.
Well, sure. But the one thing I wanted to, I mean, that's kind of beside the point of this comparison. I just wanted to kind of throw that out there. But one thing I wanted to, like, bring to our attention is that, like, yeah, so this isn't a great perfect comparison because the voicing of these speakers are a little bit different, right? But one thing that does make a difference is the off-axis response, how the woofer and tweeter meet at the crossover circuit, right? So, like, the mid-range, if you look at the off-axis response of the mid-range relative to the off-axis response of the the tower versus the bookshelf speaker, So the bookshelf speaker, the off-axis response is a little rocky there. It's not perfect, and that's because you can't get a perfect directivity matching with a 1-inch dome tweeter with a 6.5-inch whooper, right? And you can see that off-axis. You see how it dips. It's not bad. It's not bad at all, but it's not perfect. But if you go to the next slide, while the frequency response isn't perfect, it isn't as flat. The correlation between for all the responses against each other is like a lot tighter, right? They all resemble each other a lot more. So the directivity matching on the speaker is actually pretty darn good, right? All the responses, like, they share the same shape basically. So that's one way in which, that kind of illustrates the kind of the advantages and disadvantages of a 3-way versus 2-way kind of nicely here in this respect. So like that's one thing. I mean, I don't think it's a big deal. In this case, there's a little bit of a directivity mismatch on the bookshelf speaker, but it's not a big deal. But it's kind of a academic point to note, between a 2-way and
so
3-way.
bottom line is the 3-way gives you better off-axis control. It gives you more consistent response based on how the speaker is on axis. It's giving you more of that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So like that's one thing you can glean from this comparison. And I did a little bit of a listening test. I guess we could go to the next slide for that. Graphs are nice, but how do they sound? So I did some A/B listening between these speakers, and like it doesn't have a whole lot to do with 3-way versus 2-way discussion. But I said, what the heck? And as you would expect from the graphs, the NS-2000A was more exciting, right? It had a more elevated bass response and more prominent treble with a little bit more with those recessed mids. It presented a more detailed sound for female vocals, higher pitched woodwinds like a flute or piccolo, and then the cymbals, like hi-hats. It also had more a punchier kick drums and bass sounds, electronic music, like thumpy bass lines. So it was a more livelier presentation. Whereas the NS-800As was like, it was more balanced. So it was like a little bit more of a polite speaker, more neutral, I would say. I liked it for things where the sound was already really aggressive, like say for rock music or electronic music, where there's already a lot of treble, right? It kind of takes the edge off that treble. But I thought they both sounded really good. So that was kind of my comparison. I mean, I could go way more into it, but we don't want to be here all day, right? So
no, and you're doing a review of the 800s, and I'm sure you'll be referencing the 2000s since you just recently did that one too.
Oh, sure, absolutely, yeah. So what's better, right? Well, it can't be denied that a 3-way speaker, or a more-way speaker for that matter, can be more capable than a 2-way for more ambitious performance goals. However, for more modest performance goals, a 3-way may not hold any advantages. So the answer is, as usual, it all depends on one's own goals. And I've heard enough great examples of both. Well, I don't actually have a preference. It's like there's really good speakers that are 2-ways. There's also really good speakers that are 3-ways, right? There's too many good ones for me to say, oh, that design is better than that design. No, I don't have a preference personally. It's like I would.
And then the advantage of the 2-way is it's a smaller footprint, it's cheaper, it's easier to move around, and you can add bass by adding powered subs, and you could put the bass in the right locations of the room. So potentially you can get the 800s with 2 subs. Yamaha servos make subs too. They have servo subs, or you just, whatever your favorite subs are, pair your 2 subs, put them towards the front of the room in the corners or in an optimal location, depending on your room acoustics. And now you have a system that will have as much or deeper bass than the towers by themselves.
Sure, yeah, you could do that. Yeah, with these bookshelf speakers, you could extend the bass. These bookshelf speakers actually have pretty good bass on their own. So like if you wanted more bass, you could do that. So I think the answer for what's better, there's not really an answer for that. Like, and my conclusion is, I would urge shoppers not to evaluate a speaker by how many different kinds of drivers it uses or the design. I wouldn't like go shopping for speakers like looking for a 3-way design or a 2-way design. That's not the way I would go looking for a speaker. I'm more like, how does it meet your performance? Like, what do you want? Do you want a certain level of like SPL? Do you want an accurate response? Do you want a really nice looking speaker? These are both really nice, looking speakers. That's the kind of like, those are the kind of like the criteria I would shop by instead of some kind of technical criteria. I almost look at speakers as a black box, and that like whatever it comes in, how well does it come out, right? Like
Hmm.
for like studio monitors, you want it to be accurate, but for like home audio speakers, you just want it to sound nice, right? And so like it doesn't matter how many ways a speaker's like, hey, I have a single driver. Maybe I haven't heard of a really good speaker that uses a single driver, but theoretically it could exist, right? And it might sound fantastic. So I wouldn't, a one-way speaker or a five-way speaker, I don't really care, right? It's just how it sounds in the end is what matters to me. And so like that's what I would be looking at, as far as sound quality goes. But there's other criteria other than sound quality that you might want to be shopping by too. So like
Yeah,
that,
obviously there's a lot of factors. Your form factor, how big you're able to handle in a room, how
sure,
much
how
output do you need in that room, and if you're going to add, really, if you're going to add subs or not. Because if you're expecting theatrical level SPL bass, you're not going to get that from the bookshelf. You may not even get that from the tower, but the tower has a fighting chance to give you deeper bass than the bookshelf, obviously, because it's got more drivers and bigger cabinets, and higher sensitivity will play a little louder too.
Yeah, yeah, I mean that it does. It does have more sensitivity and deeper bass and more more headroom, of course, for higher dynamic applications. I think the tower could actually do well in a home theater. The bookshelves probably wouldn't try to power have it charge a dedicated home theater room, although
Yeah,
they do pretty good in as far as dynamic range goes. Yeah,
cool. All right, James. Well, I appreciate the comparison. Guys, don't forget we have that contest, the NS-800. Yamaha is sponsoring a brand new pair of NS-800As. I'll put all the links in the video description. You have till January 31st to enter this contest. And if you like this video, please hit the thumb up, hit subscribe. Don't forget about our Patreon channel at patreon.com/audioholics. We appreciate your support. You get direct access to me if you want to suggest video topics. And until next time, my friends, keep listening.